I've sat through a lot of uncomfortable conversations in my life, but nothing prepared me for what my wife said to me in that therapist's office on a Thursday afternoon in March. "You're the biggest disappointment of my life." She said it with such conviction, such finality, that even Dr. Sterling, our couple's therapist, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My wife wasn't done, though. She leaned forward, her voice gaining momentum like a freight train. "I've wasted 8 years of my life believing you'd change, believing you'd become the man I needed you to be. But you're just pathetic." The silence that followed was thick. Dr. Sterling cleared her throat, probably preparing to intervene with some therapeutic wisdom about communication techniques or emotional regulation. But before she could speak, I did something that surprised everyone in that room, including myself. I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic one, just a genuine, almost relieved smile. And then I said 4 words that would change everything. I can't argue with that. My wife's mouth dropped open. She'd clearly expected tears, begging, or at least some defensive pushback. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and continued. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I have been a disappointment to you, and I'm about to disappoint you one final time." "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped. "I'm leaving." The way she laughed, sharp and disbelieving, told me she thought this was just another empty threat. We'd danced this dance before. Arguments, ultimatums, temporary separations that always ended with me coming back, tail between my legs, promising to try harder. "Not this time." "You always say that," she said, rolling her eyes. "But you never actually do anything about it because you're too weak to." I already did. That stopped her cold. Dr. Sterling was taking notes now, probably thinking she was witnessing some breakthrough moment. She had no idea she was watching the controlled demolition of an 8-year marriage. "What do you mean?" "You already did." My wife's voice had lost some of its venom, replaced by something I rarely heard from her anymore, uncertainty. "I mean, I filed the papers 3 weeks ago. I moved my things out yesterday while you were at your sister's. I opened my own bank account last month. I've been preparing for this conversation for quite a while, actually." The color drained from her face. "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone and showed her the confirmation email from my lawyer. "Morrison and Associates. They're handling everything. Turns out when you spend months telling someone they're worthless, eventually they start to believe you're right about one thing. They deserve better." Dr. Sterling finally found her voice. "Perhaps we should take a step back and—" "No need," I said, standing up. This session just became very productive. My wife got to say everything she's been holding back, and I got the clarity I needed. My wife was staring at me like she was seeing a stranger. And maybe she was. The man who'd spent years walking on eggshells, who'd absorbed every criticism and accepted blame for problems that weren't his. That version of me had been slowly dying for months. "You can't just leave," she said, her voice smaller now. "We can work this out. That's what therapy is for. You just told a licensed professional that I'm the biggest disappointment of your life. You didn't say I disappointed you in some way, or that you're disappointed about our situation. You said I, as a person, am your biggest disappointment. Period." I looked at Dr. Sterling. "I don't suppose you have a lot of success stories that start with one spouse declaring the other a complete disappointment?" Dr. Sterling's diplomatic non-answer spoke volumes. 8 years. I continued, looking back at my wife. 8 years of trying to be someone I'm not. 8 years of having my efforts minimized, my feelings dismissed, my self-worth gradually chipped away. You want to know what's disappointing? The fact that it took me this long to realize that the problem wasn't that I was disappointing you. The problem was that I kept trying to. My wife's eyes were filling with tears now, but they looked more like panic than sadness. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "Yes, you did. And honestly, I respect you more for saying it than I would if you tried to take it back now. At least you're being honest about how you truly feel." I gathered my jacket and headed for the door. Dr. Sterling cleared her throat again. "I'd like to schedule individual sessions with both of you to process this." "Good idea," I said. My wife clearly has some things to work through. As for me, I think I just had the most productive therapy session of my life. I paused at the door and looked back at my wife one last time. She was crying now, genuine tears mixing with what looked like dawning comprehension. "For what it's worth," I said quietly, "I hope someday you find someone who doesn't disappoint you. And I hope I find someone who doesn't see loving me as a burden." The last thing I heard as I walked out was my wife calling my name. her voice cracking with something that sounded almost like desperation. But I didn't turn around. After all, I'd already given her fair warning. I was about to disappoint her one final time. My phone started ringing before I even made it to the parking lot. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By the time I reached my car, a 2015 Honda that I'd bought and paid for myself, there were already 6 missed calls and 3 text messages. I glanced at the preview of the first one. Please come back inside so we can. I didn't bother reading the rest. The drive home gave me 20 minutes to think about what came next. Home wasn't our house anymore. I'd meant what I said about moving my stuff out. 3 months of careful planning had led to this moment. Every weekend she spent at her sister's place. Every evening she worked late. Every opportunity I'd had to quietly prepare for this day. I pulled into the driveway of my buddy Carson's place. He'd offered me his spare room back in January when I first started talking about leaving, though I don't think he believed I'd actually go through with it. Carson had been my friend since college, back when my wife was still pretending to like my friends. How'd it go? He asked as I walked through the front door. He was sitting at his kitchen table with a beer and his laptop. About as well as you'd expect when someone calls you their biggest disappointment in front of a therapist. Carson winced. She actually said that. Those exact words. With feeling. My phone buzzed again. Carson glanced at it and shook his head. 12 missed calls in 30 minutes. That's got to be some kind of record. She's probably still in shock. 8 years of me backing down whenever she raised her voice. And suddenly, I actually follow through on something. So what happens now? I sat down across from him and cracked open one of his beers. Now she learns what disappointment truly looks like. The timing of everything had been crucial. I'd timed the divorce filing to coincide with several other strategic moves. Our joint checking account, which she'd controlled completely, now only had her half of our shared expenses for the next 2 months. My half was safely in an account she didn't know existed. The house we'd been renting for 3 years? I'd already spoken to the landlord. My name was coming off the lease at the end of the month. She could keep it if she wanted, but she'd need to qualify for the full rent on her income alone. Good luck with that, considering she'd been working part-time by choice for the past 2 years. Carson was reading something on his laptop, but I could tell he was listening. You know she's going to try to make your life hell, right? She's been doing that for years. The difference is now I don't have to pretend it's normal. My phone had finally stopped ringing, but the text messages kept coming. I scrolled through them without really reading. Lots of "we need to talk," and "you're making a huge mistake," and "this isn't you." That last one made me laugh out loud. "What's funny?" Carson asked. "She says this isn't me, as if she actually knows who I am anymore. I've spent so long being whoever she needed me to be that I forgot myself." The truth was, I'd been planning this exit for months, ever since that night in December when she told her sister on speakerphone that she was settling for me. She thought I was asleep. Instead, I was lying there in the dark, finally understanding that no amount of effort was ever going to be enough. That's when I started documenting everything. Her explosive outbursts that neighbors could hear. Her habit of bringing up my failures at social gatherings. The way she'd systematically isolated me from friends who didn't meet her approval. I had a file on my personal laptop, not because I wanted to use it against her, but because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't imagining the patterns. "You want some advice?" Carson said, closing his laptop. "Shoot, don't answer the phone tonight. Let her sit with what happened. If you take her call now, she'll think there's still room to negotiate. I'm not answering anything. Tomorrow, my lawyer handles all communication." Carson raised his beer. "To disappointing people who deserve it." I clinked bottles with him, but I was already thinking about what came next. The legal stuff would be straightforward. No kids, no joint property, except furniture she could keep. What interested me more was how she'd handle the social fallout. She'd probably try to paint herself as the victim. 8 years of marriage down the drain because her husband suddenly left. She'd conveniently forget the months of criticism, the public embarrassment, the systematic erosion of anything that might have resembled a partnership. But here's what she didn't know. Some of our mutual friends had already reached out to me privately over the past few months. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd noticed her behavior patterns. My phone buzzed with another text. This time it was from her sister. "What did you do?" "She's hysterical." I showed Carson the message. He shook his head. "Notice how it's your fault that she's upset, not her fault that you left. That's the family dynamic I've been dealing with for years. Everything's always someone else's responsibility. I typed back a simple response. Ask her what she said to me in therapy today. Three dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, she says you misunderstood. I deleted the message without responding. Carson was microwaving leftover pizza. You hungry? Actually, yeah. I haven't had an appetite in weeks. It was true. The constant tension at home had killed my interest in food, sleep, basically everything. Now, sitting in Carson's kitchen with a beer and the sound of normal conversation, I felt like I could breathe again. You know what the strangest part is? I said, what? I don't feel guilty. I thought I would, but I don't. I feel lighter. Carson handed me a plate of reheated pizza. That's because you finally stopped trying to manage someone else's emotions. My phone rang again, a different number this time. Her mom. They're calling in reinforcements, Carson observed. Let them. I'm not negotiating with hostage takers anymore. I turned the phone off completely and took a bite of pizza. For the first time in months, it actually tasted good. I woke up Friday morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Carson was already at work, but he'd left coffee and a note. Your phone's been buzzing since 6 a.m. Might want to change your number. The messages were a fascinating study in escalation. They started at 11 p.m. the night before with her trying the reasonable approach. Can we please just talk about this like adults? By 2 a.m., she'd moved to bargaining. I'll do therapy alone if you want. I'll work on myself. By 4 a.m., we'd reached anger. You're being completely unfair. I said one thing in anger, and you're destroying our entire marriage. And by 6 a.m., we'd arrived at desperation. Please don't do this. I love you. We can fix this. I poured myself coffee and deleted all of them without responding. The interesting part wasn't her messages, it was everyone else's. Her sister, her mom, her best friend Kelly, even her cousin from Phoenix who I'd met exactly twice. They'd formed some kind of task force overnight, each taking a different angle. Her mom went with guilt. I'm so disappointed in you. This isn't how we raised either of you to handle problems. Her sister tried logic. You're both adults. Surely you can work through one bad argument. Kelly attempted emotional manipulation. She's absolutely devastated. I've never seen her cry this hard. But the most telling message came from someone unexpected, my coworker Janet, who'd gotten my number from the company directory. Heard through the grapevine about you and your wife. Good for you. That woman's been treating you like garbage for years. That message I kept. My lawyer called at 9 a.m. Morrison was a straightforward guy who didn't waste time on pleasantries. Your wife's lawyer called this morning. Seems she hired one overnight. That was fast. Panic tends to speed up the decision-making process. They want to schedule mediation immediately. I told them we'd consider it after the paperwork is filed properly. What's the rush on their end? Same thing it always is in these situations. They're hoping if they can get you in a room quickly enough, they can talk you out of it before you have time to think it through. I've had 3 months to think it through. I figured, but they don't know that yet. Morrison was quiet for a moment. I have to ask, you sure about this? Because once we move forward officially, it gets expensive for both of you. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. All right then, I'll start the formal process today. After hanging up, I decided to venture out for groceries. Carson's place was comfortable, but I needed to start building some kind of routine that didn't involve hiding out indefinitely. The grocery store trip turned into an education in small-town dynamics. I was loading eggs into my cart when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, if it isn't the runaway husband. I turned around to find Kelly, my wife's best friend, standing there with her arms crossed. She looked like she'd been waiting for this moment. Kelly, do you have any idea what you've done to her? I continued shopping, grabbing milk and bread. I have a pretty good idea, yes. She hasn't slept. She hasn't eaten. She's been crying since yesterday afternoon. That's unfortunate. Kelly followed me down the cereal aisle, clearly frustrated by my lack of reaction. That's it. That's all you have to say. Kelly, were you in that therapy session yesterday? No, but she told me what happened. You completely overreacted to one comment made in anger. I stopped walking and looked at her directly. One comment. Kelly, how many times over the past year have you heard her criticize me? How many dinner parties where she's made jokes about my job, my friends, my appearance? How many times has she rolled her eyes when I've tried to contribute to conversations? Kelly's expression shifted slightly. She was trying to maintain her indignation, but something in my tone had clearly registered. Marriage is about working through problems. You're right. It is. I spent 8 years working through problems. What I finally realized is that to her, I wasn't a partner working through problems. I was the problem. That's not true. Kelly, last month at your birthday party, she told everyone within earshot that I was hopeless with money because I wanted to discuss our budget. 2 weeks before that, she interrupted me 3 times in one conversation to correct things I was saying about my own job. And yesterday, in front of a licensed therapist, she called me the biggest disappointment of her life. Kelly was quiet now, but I could see the wheels turning. When exactly was I supposed to start standing up for myself? After 10 years? 15? When was it going to be acceptable for me to say enough? She's passionate. She speaks before she thinks sometimes. That's not passion, Kelly. That's contempt. And contempt kills marriages. I grabbed a box of cereal and continued walking. Kelly stayed with me, but her energy had changed. So that's it. You're just done. I tried to be done 6 months ago. She talked me into staying. I tried to be done 3 months ago. She promised things would change. Yesterday, she told me exactly how she actually feels about me. So yes, Kelly, I'm done. We'd reached the checkout line. Kelly was studying my face like she was seeing me for the first time. You're different, she said finally. I'm not different. I'm just not pretending anymore. As I loaded groceries onto the conveyor belt, Kelly pulled out her phone. I should probably tell her I ran into you. That's up to you. But Kelly, when you talk to her, ask her something for me. What? Ask her if she can remember the last time she complimented me. Not thank me for doing something she wanted, not acknowledge something I did for her. Ask her when she last said something genuinely nice about me as a person. Kelly's face went pale. I could tell she was running through memories, trying to come up with an answer. And then ask yourself this. If you couldn't remember either, why did it take me so long to leave? I paid for my groceries and walked toward the exit. Kelly called after me. She really does love you, you know. I turned back one last time. Kelly, yesterday she looked me in the eye and called me her biggest disappointment. If that's love, then I finally understand why I've been so unhappy. The drive back to Carson's was quiet, but for the first time in years, it was a comfortable kind of quiet. Dr. Sterling called me Monday morning, 3 days after the session that ended my marriage. I'd like to schedule an individual appointment with you, if you're willing. Is this standard procedure after someone walks out of couples therapy? It's standard procedure when I'm concerned about both parties involved. Would Thursday at 2 p.m. work? I almost said no. The marriage was over. What was the point of more therapy? But something in her tone made me curious. I'll be there. Thursday arrived with unseasonably warm weather for March. I sat in the same office where my wife had declared me her biggest disappointment, but the dynamic felt completely different without her there. Dr. Sterling didn't waste time on small talk. How are you processing everything that happened? Better than expected, honestly. I thought I'd feel guilty, or sad, or angry. Mostly I feel relieved. She nodded, making notes. That's not uncommon when someone finally removes themselves from a chronically stressful situation. Is that your professional opinion of my marriage? Chronically stressful. Dr. Sterling set down her pen and looked at me directly. I'm going to share something with you that I normally wouldn't discuss. But given the circumstances, I think you deserve to know. Okay, I've been doing couples therapy for 15 years. I've seen relationships recover from infidelity, addiction, financial ruin, even abuse. But there's one thing that almost never changes, and I observed it consistently in your sessions, which was contempt. Your wife displayed what we call chronic contempt, not just disagreement or frustration, but a fundamental lack of respect for you as a person. The eye rolling, the interrupting, the dismissive comments, the way she spoke about you versus how she spoke to you. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. So I wasn't imagining it. You absolutely were not imagining it. What concerned me most was how normalized it had become for both of you. You'd adapted to being treated with disrespect, and she'd convinced herself that her behavior was justified because of your perceived shortcomings. Dr. Sterling pulled out a folder. I reviewed my notes from all 6 of your sessions together. Would you like to know how many times she complimented you or acknowledged something positive about you? How many? 0. Not once. But I counted 17 separate instances of criticism, dismissal, or mockery. The number hit me harder than I expected. 17. And that's just in 6 one-hour sessions with a neutral observer present. I can only imagine what your daily interactions looked like. I thought about Kelly's inability to remember the last time my wife had genuinely complimented me. Apparently, even Dr. Sterling had noticed the same pattern. Is that why you wanted to see me individually? To tell me I made the right choice? Partly, but also because I'm concerned about her reaction to your decision. Has she been contacting you? Constantly. Her whole family's involved now. They're treating this like I had some kind of breakdown instead of a breakthrough. Dr. Sterling was quiet for a moment. I had a session with her yesterday. How'd that go? She spent the entire hour trying to convince me that you misunderstood what she said, that you overreacted, that this whole situation is the result of poor communication rather than fundamental incompatibility. Sounds about right. What she doesn't seem to grasp is that calling someone your biggest disappointment isn't a communication problem. It's a character problem. The fact that she can't see the difference is telling. I leaned back in my chair. What did you tell her? I told her that successful relationships require mutual respect, and that respect can't be rebuilt through negotiation or therapy if it was never genuinely there to begin with. Bet she loved hearing that. She asked me to convince you to come back to couples therapy. She seems to believe that if we can just get you in the same room again, she can fix this. And what did you say? Dr. Sterling smiled slightly. I told her that therapy can't repair a foundation that was never solid, and that your decision to leave wasn't impulsive. It was the natural result of years of being undervalued. I appreciate you being honest with her. There's something else. She mentioned that several of your mutual friends have been less supportive than she expected. I wasn't surprised. What kind of less supportive? Apparently, when she told people you left, some of them asked her what she'd done to drive you away rather than expressing sympathy for her situation. That must have been a wake-up call. You'd think so, but instead of self-reflection, she's decided that your friends never liked her and were just waiting for an opportunity to turn you against her. I shook my head. Classic. Everyone else is the problem. I want you to know something, Dr. Sterling said, closing the folder. In 15 years of practice, I've rarely seen someone handle a difficult situation with as much dignity as you showed in that session. You didn't attack her, didn't escalate the conflict, didn't try to hurt her the way she'd hurt you. You simply stated your position and followed through. I didn't feel dignified in the moment. I felt done. Sometimes those are the same thing. We talked for another 20 minutes about coping strategies and the divorce process. As I was getting ready to leave, Dr. Sterling offered one final observation. Your wife asked me if there was any way to save the marriage. Do you want to know what I told her? Sure. I told her that the marriage ended the moment she decided you were a disappointment rather than a partner. The divorce papers are just making it official. I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't experienced in years validated. Not just by Dr. Sterling's professional opinion, but by the realization that my decision hadn't been made in anger or hurt feelings. It had been made from a place of genuine self-respect. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. Another text from my wife. Dr. Sterling says you won't see me. Please reconsider. I can change. For the first time in 3 months, I actually responded. You had 8 years to change. You chose to call me your biggest disappointment instead. That choice has consequences. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again, then disappeared again. Finally, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Yes, you did, and we both know it. This time, she didn't respond at all. I drove back to Carson's place with the radio up and the windows down. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt genuinely optimistic about what came next. 2 weeks after my individual session with Dr. Sterling, I got a call that I'd been half expecting. This is Dr. Sterling. I wanted to let you know that I won't be continuing therapy with your wife. Professional differences? You could say that. She's not ready to accept responsibility for her role in the breakdown of your marriage. Without that acknowledgement, therapy becomes counterproductive. I was at Carson's kitchen table, eating breakfast before work. What happened? Dr. Sterling was quiet for a moment. Normally, I wouldn't share details, but she's given me permission to discuss our sessions with you. She seems to think that if you hear what we talked about, you might reconsider your position. I'm listening. She spent 3 sessions trying to convince me that you'd misinterpreted her words, that you were being overly sensitive, and that the whole situation could be resolved if you'd just accept a simple apology. Sounds familiar. When I pressed her to examine her communication patterns over the course of your marriage, she became defensive. When I suggested that calling someone your biggest disappointment might reflect deeper issues with respect and empathy, She accused me of taking your side. I could picture the conversation perfectly. My wife had never handled criticism well, even from professionals. Did she mention anything about trying to save the marriage? That's actually why I'm calling. In our final session yesterday, she asked me to give you a message, which was, she wanted me to tell you that she's willing to do anything to fix this. Individual therapy, couples counseling with a different therapist, a trial separation instead of divorce. Anything except accepting that it might actually be over. What did you tell her? I told her that relationships can't survive on one person's willingness to change after the other person has already left. I also told her something else that I think you should hear. Go ahead. I explained to her that healthy relationships require both people to see each other as fundamentally good people who sometimes make mistakes. But when one person sees their partner as fundamentally flawed and disappointing, that's not a relationship that can be repaired. Dr. Sterling paused. She asked me if I thought you were a fundamentally good person. And I told her that in all my sessions with both of you, I'd never once heard you speak about her with contempt, even when discussing problems. You expressed frustration, disappointment, even anger, but never contempt. The same couldn't be said in reverse. I found myself smiling. How'd she take that? Not well. She said I was clearly biased because men like you are good at manipulating women like me into feeling sorry for them. Ouch. That's when I realized she wasn't just dismissive of you. She was dismissive of anyone who didn't validate her perspective, including me. After hanging up with Dr. Sterling, I decided to check my messages for the first time in days. The volume had decreased significantly, but the content had become more interesting. My wife's sister had texted, "I owe you an apology. Mom and I talked to her for 3 hours yesterday. We're starting to understand why you left." Kelly had sent something even more revealing. "You were right about the compliments thing. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks, and I literally cannot remember her saying anything genuinely nice about you. Ever. I'm sorry I gave you a hard time at the grocery store." But the most unexpected message came from my wife's cousin in Phoenix. "Heard about you guys splitting up. Just wanted you to know that every time we visited, she spent the whole time complaining about you. Made family dinners really uncomfortable. You seem like a good guy. Hope you find someone who appreciates that." I was reading through these when Carson walked in from work. "You look like someone who just got good news. Dr. Sterling fired my wife as a client. Therapists can do that." Apparently so. She also said my wife asked her to convince me to come back. Carson grabbed a beer from the fridge. "Let me guess, didn't go according to plan?" Dr. Sterling basically told her that she's been treating me with contempt for years, and that contempt kills relationships. Bet that went over well. My wife accused the therapist of being manipulated by me. Carson nearly choked on his beer. She said that to a licensed professional? Yep. That's when Dr. Sterling decided she couldn't help someone who refused to accept any responsibility for their actions. My phone buzzed with a new message. This time it was from my wife directly. "Dr. Sterling refused to keep seeing me. She says I'm not ready for therapy. This is all your fault." I showed Carson the message. He read it and shook his head. Even when a neutral professional confirms everything you've been saying, she still finds a way to blame you. That's the pattern. Everything's always someone else's fault. Another message came in immediately. "I found a new therapist who understands that marriage takes work from both people, not just one person giving up when things get hard." I deleted it without responding. Carson was making dinner, spaghetti with store-bought sauce, the kind of simple meal that somehow tasted better than anything I'd eaten in years. "You know what's funny?" I said. "What?" For months, I kept thinking that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive, or too demanding, or not understanding enough. But every single person who's observed our relationship from the outside has come to the same conclusion, which is that she treated me badly, and I put up with it way longer than I should have. Carson served 2 plates of pasta. So what happens now? Now I wait for the divorce to be finalized and figure out what normal relationships are supposed to look like. You going to start dating again? I thought about it. Eventually. But first I need to remember who I am when I'm not constantly trying to manage someone else's emotions. My phone buzzed one more time. Another message from my wife. "I love you. Doesn't that count for anything?" This time, I did respond. Love without respect isn't love. It's just emotional dependency. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Then, what does that mean? I typed back. "It means that if you truly loved me, You wouldn't have spent years making me feel like a disappointment. No more dots appeared after that. Carson raised his beer. To learning the difference between love and respect, and to therapists who aren't afraid to tell the truth. We clinked bottles, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 6 months after that Thursday afternoon in Dr. Sterling's office, I was sitting in my own apartment, a modest one-bedroom place with decent natural light and neighbors who minded their own business. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks earlier. My phone rang around dinner time. Dr. Sterling, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to follow up on how you're doing. Doing well, actually. Better than I expected. I'm glad to hear that. I also wanted to tell you about my final conversation with your ex-wife. I set down my fork. She came back. One last session, about a month ago. She wanted me to write a letter for the divorce proceedings, explaining that the breakdown of your marriage was due to communication issues rather than fundamental incompatibility. Did you write it? No. But I did have one final conversation with her that I think you should hear about. Dr. Sterling cleared her throat. I asked her a simple question. If you called her tomorrow and wanted to reconcile, what would she change about how she treated you? What did she say? She said she'd be more careful about her tone and try not to criticize you in public. When I asked if she thought there were deeper issues to address, she said you were just too sensitive and that most men would have handled her direct communication style better. I wasn't surprised. So even after everything, she still thinks the problem was my reaction to her behavior, not the behavior itself. Exactly. That's when I told her something that I think gave her the clarity she'd been avoiding. Which was, I said, your husband didn't leave because you called him a disappointment that day in my office. He left because you genuinely believed he was a disappointment, and after 8 years, he finally believed it too. The tragedy isn't that you lost your marriage. It's that you convinced a good man that he wasn't good enough, when the truth was that you weren't good enough for him. The line went quiet. I could hear Dr. Sterling breathing, waiting for my response. How did she take that? She cried. Actually cried, for the first time in any of our sessions. Not angry tears or frustrated tears, genuine grief. I think that was the moment she finally understood what she'd lost. But it was too late. Yes, and I told her that too. I said that some damage can't be undone, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because trust, once completely broken, can't be rebuilt on the same foundation. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the past 6 months. I'd started going to a gym that Carson recommended. I'd reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years because they made my wife uncomfortable. I'd even had coffee with a woman from work. Nothing serious. Just a reminder of what it felt like to have a conversation where nobody criticized my opinions. Most importantly, I'd remembered who I was when I wasn't walking on eggshells. My ex-wife had moved back in with her parents after losing the rental house. According to Carson, who heard it through mutual friends, she'd started telling people that I'd abandoned her during a difficult time in her life. The narrative had shifted from he overreacted to one comment to he left when I needed him most. But the people who mattered, the ones who'd actually observed our relationship, weren't buying it. Kelly had texted me last week. Ran into your ex at Target. She spent 20 minutes telling me how unfairly you treated her. Then she spent the next 20 minutes complaining about her new therapist, her parents, her job, and the grocery store cashier. I finally understood what you meant about contempt. That evening, as I was reading a book I'd bought simply because I wanted to, not because someone had dismissed my taste in literature, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is your ex. I got a new phone. I wanted you to know that I understand now what Dr. Sterling meant. I really was your biggest disappointment, wasn't I? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. No, you weren't my disappointment. You were my lesson. What kind of lesson? That I deserve to be with someone who sees the best in me, not someone who's convinced I'm fundamentally flawed. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, I hope you find that. I already did. What do you mean? I found myself. This time, there were no more dots. No more messages. No more attempts to relitigate the past or negotiate a different future. 6 months after disappointing my ex-wife one final time by actually leaving, I'd learned the most important lesson of my adult life. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to let them treat you badly. And sometimes, the biggest disappointment you can give someone is showing them exactly what they've lost, not through cruelty or revenge, but simply by becoming the person you were always meant to be when nobody was tearing you down. I finished my book that night, made plans to meet Carson for drinks, and went to sleep in my own bed, in my own place, with my own peace of mind. The disappointment, it turned out, was entirely worth it.